Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Sean ustedes bienvenidos a la entrevista. Estamos viviendo tiempos inéditos, en parte por la pandemia de COVID-19, pero en parte también porque estamos registrando la peor depresión económica, por lo menos desde 1932, en algunos casos, en países como México, peor todavía que la de 1932. Esto nos lleva a buscar soluciones para poder salir adelante. Mucha gente piensa que es cuestión de quizás tener un mayor papel del gobierno, que el gobierno intervenga más en la economía. Hay quienes piensan que no, que la forma de reaccionar es en la apertura de mercados. Me da mucho gusto poderme conectar hasta Suecia con Johan Norberg. Johan Norberg es uno de los especialistas, de los economistas, de los pensadores suecos más importantes de los últimos tiempos. Él ha escrito libros como Progreso y En defensa del capitalismo global. Y bueno, pues son libros que han marcado y que han generado una gran discusión y es un buen momento para hablar precisamente con el doctor Norberg. Tenemos un enlace con él y vamos a hacer la conversación en inglés para que usted pueda escucharlo directamente si habla ese idioma y si no puede tener los subtítulos en español. Professor Norberg, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
We're living in the midst of a recession, a very major recession, the worst that we've had since 1932. Some people believe that the solution is have more government intervention in the economy. In fact, there are a lot of people who say that this crisis, as well as the crisis of 2008, are a consequence of the fact that government hasn't intervened enough in the economy. What's your position?
Well, actually, my take is that it's quite the contrary. I think that what we're seeing right now is the consequences of by accident, because of a virus, accident intended this, no one wanted this to happen. But in effect, what we're seeing is a real life test of some of the ideas of people who oppose capitalism, the populist, protectionists, and socialists of the left and of the right, who always said that we should try to dismantle capitalism and trade and multinational investments. Well, that's what we're having right now. We stopped the world economy. We stopped global capitalism from working for 3 months. No flights, no mobility, very little trade is functioning. And the result is already in. It is a Great Depression, global depression, mass unemployment, and an increase in extreme poverty. So I think this is really a vindication of the ideas that we shouldn't take these things for granted. They create free trade, free markets, individual liberty, create massive wealth. And whenever we disturb that, we see terrible consequences. And if we see that already now, after 3 months, well, why would we want to make such a system permanent?
Well, we've been told, in fact, that if we closed our borders, if we all trade only in our locality, in our little village, things would be better. But they're not getting better, are they?
No, and I think that we can definitely see that during this pandemic as well, that those things that we depend upon and we need to get food on our shelves and we need to get medical drugs and medical technology and so on. We depend on other people and on other countries to get that. Some people object to that, but that's the only way to make it come down in price and make it efficient. Now, lots of hospitals are screaming out for ventilators. They need ventilators to keep people breathing, even though they suffer from possibly a terminal illness. And some people say, let's make those nationally. Let's become self-sufficient and produce all those things back home. Well, you could do that. It would be incredibly costly to produce ventilators like that. But every ventilator is made up of 500 different components, and you can't build 500 different factories in every country to create those different components. In that case, they would be incredibly costly and they would be ill-fitting, and you couldn't afford even one ventilator in either country. And that's the case with almost every single item in a modern economy, from the computers and the microphones and the earphones that we're using. It depends on the skills, the ideas, and the hard work of millions of people all around the world. Trying to do things locally makes everything more expensive, especially for those who have little means and low incomes.
Professor Norberg, a lot of intellectuals and politicians in Mexico tell us all the time that Sweden is a prosperous country, that Sweden is an example to the world because it has a socialist model and a lot of government intervention in the economy. Is it true?
Well, Sweden is quite successful, that has to be said, but it's not because we have any kind of socialist intervention in the economy. We had that once. We had that in the 1970s and 1980s, and that is what people still remember in Mexico, in Latin America, and all around the world. They remember those 20 years when Sweden experimented with socialism, and they thought that Sweden was doing relatively well during this period, and we were doing relatively well. But it's like that old joke. How do you end up with a small fortune? Well, you start with a large fortune and then you waste most of that fortune. And that's what we did in the 1970s and 1980s. Sweden was already one of the richest countries on the planet. And that was built on an open economy with a small, limited government and low taxes. That made us one of the richest countries on the planet. And then some politicians, most Swedish politicians, thought that then they could redistribute everything and intervene in the economy everywhere. And that's the period when Sweden began to lag behind other countries. We didn't create a single net job in the private sector for 25 years, and it ended in a terrible crisis. And after that, politicians from the left to the right in Sweden began to dismantle that socialist experiment and began to return to more of free markets and of free trade. And today, even if you talk to social democrats in Sweden, they say that they don't like socialism because they tried that once and that failed. Instead, we need some sort of centrist, open economy with a limited government and always forcing companies to be competitive in the global economy.
We are in the midst of the deepest recession, at least since 1932. What is the solution? Should we have governments spend more and more and increase public debt, or is there any other way?
Well, the problem with borrowing more and more, and it's always a nice, comfortable solution in the short run, but it's that sooner or later you're going to have to pay those debts. Someone is going to have to do that, and that'll be the future. That'll be our kids. That'll be the future potential jobs and businesses that we have. I think that what's going on right now is not just trying to keep everything alive the way it was before the pandemic, before the recession, because things also change. There will be a change in the demand from consumers. There will be new business models that will function and others that will not. And then it's incredibly important for the future of the Mexican government, of the Swedish economy, that we make sure that those business models that work, that could expand and begin to hire again, that capital and labor can swiftly move to those places. And that also means that we must stop to protect the old businesses, models, and jobs that aren't sustainable for the future, because that will only create poverty. We must make sure that we have this transition, this mobility in the economy, and therefore we should avoid trying to keep everything in our economy on life support, I think.
We are told all the time, at least by intellectuals and some politicians, that we are living in worse conditions than we were, maybe 50 years or 100 years ago, that we were much happier and that we had healthier and better lives 100 years ago, that all this apparent progress is not really progress. What do you think? You have a book on that.
Yes, I do. And I use a famous quote by Franklin Adams saying that the only excuse for thinking about the good old days is a bad memory. The fact that we forget the struggles, the pain, the poverty that our ancestors have gone through. And I think the best cure for that is to talk to our parents and our grandparents about the kind of life that they led in desperate poverty, without any kind of access to education, to healthcare, and modern goods and services that we use every day. What we have seen in the last 25 years, despite this ongoing intellectual complaint about the world, is that we've actually seen the fastest social and economic progress that the world has ever seen. if you look at objective measures of life expectancy, infant mortality, chronic undernourishment, in extreme poverty, every day during these last 25 years, extreme poverty around the world declined by 130,000 people. And that's an incredible achievement, the likes of which we've never seen in human history. So if we don't pay attention to that, we're a little bit ungrateful, and that's bad in itself, but it also means that we risk to lose insights into what really works and could help us through this crisis and create more progress in the future as well.
In the 1960s, it became fashionable to say that there were some limits to growth. We were told that we were going to run out of natural resources. We were told that we couldn't keep on growing, that the only hope for humanity was to limit growth. What's your take after these 50 years or more than 50 years?
Yes, we've heard that again and again, but we've never really abandoned the use of a resource because we ran out of it, but because of human imagination led us to find new resources and new ways of using them constantly. And we can actually see that despite these 50 years of complaining that all those resources will be lost, we've actually seen a decline in prices on most of these resources since then, which seems to suggest that we are getting better at finding new resources, finding better ways of conserving resources and recycling them and using them in better ways. And I think it's important to remember what Nobel laureate in economics Paul Romer has said, that growth doesn't mean that we put more dishes on the table constantly or use more recipes in every dinner dish. It means that we invent better recipes so that the food is hopefully healthier, better tasting, and so on. So it's new combinations of the resources that we already have. And in that case, it's not access to atoms and molecules that limits us. It's only human imagination and freedom to use that imagination to create new inventions. And therefore, I think that growth is unlimited. As long as human beings are not limited, then growth is not limited.
Johan Norberg, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Y a usted, amigo televidente, que hace posible este programa, se lo agradezco también. Eso es todo por hoy, pero no se le olvide a usted. Nos vemos la próxima.